Deep in the frozen forests of North America, where winter winds howl through ancient pines and darkness falls early, there exists a legend so terrifying that indigenous peoples would barely whisper its name. This is not just another monster story meant to scare children around campfires. This is the Wendigo, a creature born from the darkest corners of human desperation, and its legend carries a warning that resonates even more powerfully in our modern world than it did centuries ago. Today, we're going to uncover the truth behind America's most terrifying monster, explore its origins in Native American culture, and discover why this ancient legend might be more relevant now than ever before. The Wendigo legend originates primarily from the Algonquian-speaking tribes of the northern United States and Canada, including the Ojibwe, Cree, and Innu peoples. According to their traditions, the Wendigo is not simply a monster that exists in the wilderness, but rather a transformation, a horrible fate that can befall any human being. Picture this: a person lost in the wilderness during the brutal winter, starving, desperate, their humanity slowly slipping away with each passing day. In their final moments of desperation, they commit the ultimate taboo. They consume human flesh to survive. But survival comes at a terrible price. The moment human flesh touches their lips, they are forever changed, transformed into something that is no longer human. The physical descriptions of the Wendigo vary across different tribal accounts, but certain terrifying details remain consistent. Some describe it as a giant, towering creature, 15 feet tall or more, with glowing eyes that pierce through the darkness like burning coals. Others depict it as a skeletal being, emaciated and gaunt, with skin stretched so tight over its bones that you can see every ridge and hollow. Its heart, they say, is made of ice, frozen solid, incapable of warmth or compassion. The creature is forever hungry, constantly craving human flesh, yet no amount of feeding can ever satisfy its appetite. In fact, the more it eats, the larger it grows, and the more intense its hunger becomes, creating an endless cycle of consumption and desire. But here's where the Wendigo legend transcends typical monster mythology and enters the realm of profound cultural wisdom. The Wendigo wasn't created to explain strange noises in the forest or to keep children from wandering too far from camp. It was a psychological and spiritual concept, a manifestation of the most dangerous human impulses: greed, selfishness, and excess. In the harsh environment of the northern wilderness, where resources were scarce and survival depended on community cooperation, individualistic greed could literally mean death for the entire tribe. The Wendigo represented what happened when a person placed their own survival and desires above the collective good of their community. Think about the context in which these peoples lived. During long, brutal winters, food could become scarce. Tribes had to share resources carefully, ration their supplies, and support one another through the hardest times. If even one person hoarded food or acted purely out of self-interest, it could trigger a cascade of suffering and death. The Wendigo legend served as a powerful deterrent against such behavior. It taught that those who gave in to selfish impulses, who consumed more than their share, who put personal gain above community welfare, would lose their humanity entirely. They would become monsters, outcasts, forever cursed to wander alone with an insatiable hunger that could never be filled. The Wendigo wasn't just a campfire story, it was taken deadly seriously, and historical records document disturbing cases of what became known as Wendigo psychosis. This was a culture-bound syndrome where individuals, usually during harsh winters, would become convinced they were transforming into a Wendigo. They would develop an intense craving for human flesh and express terror at what they felt themselves becoming. Some would beg their own families to kill them before they could harm others. These cases were documented by European traders, missionaries, and anthropologists throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. One of the most famous cases involved a Cree man named Swift Runner in 1879. despite having access to food supplies at a nearby trading post. Swift Runner killed and consumed his entire family during the winter. He later claimed to have been possessed by the Wendigo spirit. He was tried and executed by Canadian authorities. But to the indigenous communities, this wasn't simply a case of murder or insanity. It was the Wendigo curse manifesting in real life. Tribal elders had protocols for dealing with suspected Wendigos, and these were not taken lightly. In some cases, individuals believed to be transforming into Wendigos were killed by their own communities. Not out of cruelty, but out of desperate necessity to protect the tribe from a perceived supernatural threat. Fast forward to modern times, and the Wendigo has clawed its way into mainstream popular culture, though often stripped of its deeper cultural significance. You'll find Wendigo-inspired creatures in horror films like Antlers, in Pet Sematary, in video games like Until Dawn, and in TV series ranging from Supernatural to Hannibal. Stephen King has referenced the Wendigo in multiple works. Comic books, particularly Marvel Comics, have featured the creature as a supernatural antagonist. These modern interpretations typically focus on the monster's terrifying appearance and its hunger for human flesh, creating jump scares and visceral horror. However, this pop culture appropriation has sparked significant controversy within Native American communities. Many indigenous activists and cultural leaders argue that using the Wendigo as entertainment trivializes a sacred and serious spiritual concept. It's not just a monster from their mythology, it's a teaching tool, a moral warning, and a reflection of real psychological and social phenomena their ancestors experienced. When Hollywood transforms the Wendigo into just another creature feature, it strips away layers of cultural meaning and reduces a complex spiritual belief to a simple boogeyman. This is part of a larger pattern of Native American cultural elements being borrowed, commodified, and misrepresented in mainstream media. Here's where the Wendigo legend becomes genuinely prophetic and eerily relevant to our contemporary world. Some indigenous scholars and environmental activists have begun using the term Wendigo metaphorically to describe modern industrial capitalism and consumerism. Think about the core characteristics of the Wendigo: insatiable hunger, endless consumption, growth that feeds on itself, the prioritization of individual gain over collective welfare, and the transformation of humans into something monstrous through unchecked greed. Now think about our current economic system and consumer culture. We live in a world where corporations grow larger by consuming more resources, where economic systems demand endless growth on a finite planet, where individual wealth accumulation is celebrated even as communities struggle and ecosystems collapse. The Wendigo's curse of growing larger and hungrier with each meal mirrors perfectly the logic of consumer capitalism, where satisfying one desire simply creates new desires, where enough is never enough, where we're constantly told we need more, bigger, better. Environmental destruction, resource depletion, climate change. These are the modern manifestations of the Wendigo curse, where humanity's insatiable appetite for consumption is literally destroying the world that sustains us. Jack Forbes, a Powhatan, Delaware scholar, wrote a powerful book titled Columbus and Other Cannibals, in which he argued that European colonizers were driven by a form of Wendigo psychosis, a spiritual sickness of consumption and exploitation. He described Wetiko, another name for Wendigo, as a cannibalism of the soul, where people consume the lives, resources, and spirits of others to feed an endless hunger for power and wealth. This framework helps explain not just historical colonialism, but ongoing systems of exploitation and environmental destruction. The Wendigo, in this interpretation, isn't a creature lurking in the forests. It's the spirit of selfish consumption that has infected our entire civilization. As we discuss the Wendigo, it's crucial to approach this legend with appropriate respect and cultural sensitivity. This is not merely folklore or entertainment, it's a living part of indigenous spiritual and cultural heritage. Native American communities have specific protocols about how these stories should be told, who should tell them, and in what contexts. Some elders believe that speaking the Wendigo's name too freely can invite its attention or power. Others worry that outsiders sharing these stories without proper understanding perpetuates harmful stereotypes or misrepresents indigenous beliefs. When we engage with indigenous legends like the Wendigo, we should do so as students, not appropriators. This means listening to indigenous voices, reading works by Native American authors and scholars, supporting indigenous communities, and acknowledging that these stories belong to specific peoples with specific histories. It means recognizing that we don't have the right to take these cultural elements and use them however we please, especially when indigenous peoples themselves are still fighting for recognition, rights, and sovereignty. The Wendigo teaches us about the dangers of taking more than our share, and that lesson applies to cultural knowledge just as much as it applies to physical resources. The Wendigo stands as one of the most terrifying monsters in American legend, not because of its physical appearance or its supernatural powers, but because of what it represents. It's a mirror held up to humanity's darkest impulses, a warning about what we become when we prioritize consumption over community, when we feed our hunger at the expense of others, when we lose our humanity in the pursuit of more. For the indigenous peoples who created this legend, the Wendigo was a teaching tool about balance, restraint, and the importance of maintaining our humanity even in the most desperate circumstances. In our modern world of climate crisis, wealth inequality, and endless consumption, the Wendigo legend feels less like ancient superstition and more like urgent prophecy. We are living in the age of the Wendigo, where our collective hunger for resources, our economic systems built on endless growth, and our individual obsession with consumption are transforming us into the very monsters the legend warned about. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Wendigo is this: the real horror isn't some creature lurking in the frozen forest. It's the monster we become when we forget that we're part of a larger community, when we consume without restraint, when we lose sight of what it means to be truly human. The question we must ask ourselves is, can we break the Wendigo's curse before it's too late, or will our insatiable hunger ultimately consume us all?